How are you, man?
I'm very well, thank you, buddy.
Yeah, it's nice to see you, bro.
It is, you too.
So, you've recently moved to Brighton, I hear. It's a bit of a change,
I did, yeah. I wanted some sea and some sun, but
Yeah, so what was the thinking behind that? Just get out of the big smoke, get out of London and move on.
yeah, I think me moving to London was somewhat of a life decision into moving away from this kind of Peter Pan existence of really chasing what I felt like I really wanted to do and learn and embrace all these things, to then coming to London to set up something a bit more substantial. And then me realizing, well, I've worked really hard at that, but I also want to feel a little bit more inspired with my surroundings, maybe some people that are a bit more different or unusual, and also see sun, nature,
man.
you know?
I mean, there's certainly different, unusual people in Brighton.
There is.
Yeah.
On many levels, yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit, not dissimilar to Shoreditch, but at least you got the sun and the sea, man. I mean, that's something that's why I wanted to bring you on here, actually. Like, you're looking for another experience, and you've always struck me as somebody who was always looking to experience as much as possible, and I thought that was really interesting. And I wanted to get into that today, actually, a little bit about how those experiences have shaped you personally, but also in terms of your training. A big part of what we do is movement or gymnastics, or however you want to frame it in its various modalities. But I think what would be really interesting to get into your experience of movement, help people understand a little bit about what movement practice is, and how that you've learned from that and practically applied that to your life. So I mean, this is the next chapter in Wil Brown's life. So where did it all start, man? Like, where did it all start?
Good question. The experience is the perfect word, I would say, first and foremost. Like, experience is definitely a driver of my philosophy, my life, my orientation through life, let's say. I'm always thinking, or feeling at least, how can my actions give me potential to experience more? And this is somewhat of a key detail when I'm teaching people, of like, if I make this decision for this person or for this to help this person, is it going to give them freedom or something for them to experience something more? And I think this is in some way the basis of movement, a movement practice. It's the reason why I say things like the thing is bigger than the thing is exactly for this reason. The practice is to serve the experience of life, the experiencing of life. If we're so obsessed with only practicing inside in a gym, and we're limiting, sensory inputs, we're limiting ourselves in these kind of like open and diverse experiences, I feel like it limits the life that we can live. And
Sure. But in terms of so let's take it down to the practice side of things. I think that's a really interesting one, because experience is everything, and from each experience there might be a completely different type of training, but you're still taking these absolute gems from there and then applying it and shaping it into your own practice. I think I feel that in its most simple terms, but it was powerlifting. Let's take a 5-5 rep sets model. The baseline for building raw strength, really, when it comes to the squat, the dead, the bench. Well, guess what? So does the pull. We can use the same pattern to develop strength in pulls. And I think with movement practice, we've spoken a little bit about the amount of diversity that there is in it, and how actually it's being used more and more as a buzzword now. And I think it'd be really useful, for me as well, is how would you define it? How would you define it? Have you taken inputs? I know you played American football, was I right? You did CrossFit. What inputs have you taken from that? And does that all shape your movement practice? Is that movement practice to you, or has it become something a little more specific?
Yeah, like you say, I think movement practice has become somewhat of a selling point business word, something to maybe gain you clients, students.
We would say similar to functional training. What is functional training? What is movement? It's a very open-ended word. I
don't think necessarily open-ended words are bad. I think it's more so how the intention behind them. And so if there's a wholehearted intention to use this word movement to help people, and you really believe that this is something that you're pushing forward, then awesome. There's no one owns a word. No one can say that's a bad word to use, unless the intentions behind it are adverse to that. Now, I can say how I feel about movement in the sense of from a point of view of my perspective, my philosophy, which is somewhat of a structured kind of layered idea. But like you said, I think movement is so general, you can't quite, it's like consciousness. It's like, it's kind of like this, and when we go towards it, it goes again. Like the golden snitch from Quidditch. It's like, it's not quite that thing, but we're always orienting towards that thing. And that's why I tried to use the word physical intelligence, or the term physical intelligence, because if movement is so general, like my digestive system is moving constantly. So therefore I'm a mover, or am I not? That's, I think, too semantic to really gain any value.
Well, I think perhaps that's perhaps the issue. It's like everyone has a goal. I want to lose 20 pounds, and then it's like, well, how do I apply that within the movement dogma or the movement mentality?
Or how can we use movement to not have a dogma?
Yes.
And this is the goal. I think for me, it's less so about saying and being dogmatic about certain things. If movement is so general, then we need to also be general with our intentions.
Okay, that's interesting, because I was going to use the word, I've written the word disorientating there. So if I'm new, I feel this movement, and I love what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, but I'm thinking how scary that seems to somebody who's used to reading the fitness editorials of mainstream magazines. Where do I begin? Everyone wants an answer, and I think what you're trying to say is there isn't one pill that solves this, and it's actually losing those constructs, which allows you freedom, and you're saying that that then transcends into your own freedom as well, outside of the physical. So what do you tell a beginner?
There's many conversations to be had on that. For example, like how the education system's molding us from this kind of like industrial revolution style of factory crafted people, which I think hinders people's perspectives.
Okay.
But I don't think that's a good conversation to have right now.
No.
I would prefer. So what I would suggest to the beginning students that I get in London Movement Group, for example, or online coaching, is to try and bring it back to like being an autonomous individual and saying, what are you truly driven by, and like what inspires you? Because there's something inside of you that you.
I like that. Yeah.
You're. For whatever reason, you're like, wow, that's amazing. And maybe it was mystical, or maybe it was scary, or maybe whatever it might be. That's at least a starting point to get you going. Yeah. And that's a container that other things sit underneath. So let's say, for example, you were amazed by a handstand push-up. And now we've got so many things to work on, prerequisites, underneath that container.
Sure.
And that is somewhat of a skeleton key into the movement practice.
Yeah.
So for me, it was injury.
Okay.
So I was doing American football and CrossFit, and I was completely destroyed. I had a bad knee injury. I came back from a bad knee injury, had a neck injury, and it was just boom. And my aspirations to kind of push forward towards like GB team were completely shattered. And then I turned to my supplementary training of CrossFit, which was also then, I was unable to do the main things I was doing, Olympic lifting, squats, deadlifts, all these kind of compound movements that were so necessary. My knee's busted. What can I do now? I undertook bodyweight training, started to use my body in a way, and I was like, oh, I can gain a really nice stimulus and more of a complex, enjoyable stimulus and learn new things. Oh, I want to learn a handstand as well. So my buy-in was learning to handstand walk. And from learning to handstand walk, I was like, how can I make this harder? And I tried to weight my handstand walk.
I think I saw a picture of that, you crazy bastard.
I basically put a chin-up weight belt around my waist, attached it to a 25 kilo weight plate on the floor.
It was you.
And I was like walking, pulling like sled pull.
God, yeah.
But what that helped me to do was to slow the resistance of me falling on my back.
Yeah, so mate, you're very good at correcting overbalance, I imagine.
Because I learned from...
It's like a heel pull on steroids.
Exactly, yeah. And then I was like, okay, interesting.
That is interesting.
I learned, and then that gave me that skeleton key, that in to other things.
Yeah, that's interesting. I really like that. And I think I actually unconsciously do that in my approach with lift, actually. And that's something I read here is people have a goal and then they expect a certain solution and an application. So I want to lose 20 pounds, HIIT training 3 times a week. We won't go into the semantics of it, but you get the picture. And I think that's interesting because people are like, right, well, I have this goal, and they come to say lift or they come to London Movement Group. And you're like, well, and the answer that they get isn't necessarily what they had in their minds. And it takes a little bit of understanding. And this is the skeleton key concept. And I use the handstand all the time because it was my route too. You know, and that's interesting. I think there's some parallels there we should talk about. But, you know, I wanted to learn to handstand. That opened the door then for me to go, well, if I want to press handstand, I need to understand how to move my hips. Is necessarily just cranking forward in a Jefferson curl or sitting in a pancake stretch the best way for me to actually condition my hips? No. And then I got into the rope flow locomotion, and recently the closed circuit flows on the floor with you, and then my hips get better everywhere. And actually what you've realized is that these mixed stimuluses from different areas were actually a far better medicine than this one prescribed idea that we get put in our heads. And I think that's really interesting. I love that skeleton key approach.
Because then, so I really like this idea of the split brain, which is by Sir Ian McGilchrist, and he talks about this idea of how the left brain is different from the right brain, and maybe we're functioning with the same task, but the two halves are doing very different things.
I see, yeah.
So we've got right brain being very open, understanding, and not really comprehending things on an individual level. It's very much like, whoa. It's like when you look at a landscape, you can kind of take everything in, but you don't understand the individual parts. And then you've got the left brain, which is very directly focused. I might be looking at the hairs on your eyebrow, for example. That's my left brain taking over into my general stimulus, into focus stimulus. And I think what's happened in culture, or what seems to have happened from what this guy's saying, is that left brain seems to be dominant. We like to go narrow. We like to go, interesting, I understand that.
Almost fixating on that, yeah.
And going, okay, that fits in that box, therefore it's ticked. We understand it. And we lose then how that box fits into the general picture. And I think this is a big problem not problem, I'd say. This is some friction for beginners coming into such an open practice, is that maybe this beginner wants to fit things into a box. They want a CrossFit style modality of, we understand everything, we know what's going to happen, you do this, you become Matt Fraser.
No,
not
you
the case.
We lose that.
Not the case.
Yeah.
And I think that then, for me at least, movement practice or movement culture, whatever you want to call it, physical practice, gives you more of a life in a practice.
Yeah.
It gives you a practice for life, which is complex. We don't really understand it. Loads of random things happen. Some things good, some things not so good. If I can treat my parkour practice, my dance practice, my hand balancing work, my strength and conditioning, whatever it might be, with at least some perspective on openness to the general chaos of life, I'm a little bit prepared. And I think more prepared than I would be if I just went,
super interesting.
I'm a blinkered horse.
It's so interesting. It's like in losing that attachment to the dogma, you actually find yourself. And I think that's like a real... That's super telling for myself as well, because I was so in this structured bodybuilding, whether if it's rugby to S&C, running direct. People have used I think David Weck, Lego man training, block training, and actually you get stuck in this. This is what I have to do to get faster, get bigger, get stronger, and you get so blinkered. And having blinkers is good in some times, but when you don't know when to take them off, that can be really limiting. And I think for me, it was like when I lost that attachment to anything, or I even do it within movement practice, are you getting too attached to my handstand training, going, why do my traps hurt? Why do my wrists hurt? Well, it's because you're constantly doing handstand. Your blinkers are on again, bruv. And actually by losing those blinkers and allowing you to try different things, you pick up on so many different elements. And I tell you what, I've not had an experience with it so far that it hasn't come back to actually benefit the goal that I was focusing on in the first place. Right. And I think that's quite beautiful about the practice. And
that's not to say that the goal in the first place can change.
No.
And I think, I recently made a video, kind of the thing is bigger than the thing.
Yeah, and goals are liquid, aren't they? They're not fluid.
Potentially, goals are super useful to move towards because that gives us a purpose, and I think we need that as humans. Otherwise, we turn to nihilism. What the key part is not holding a dogma towards that goal. Being able to say, okay, if I'm at A, it's where I am right now, and B is my orientation, I don't expect or need to get there, but I need to move towards it.
Sure.
And then it's like, if I realize when I've taken steps towards that goal, that actually life's changed, my perspectives have changed. I've grown through that process, and actually now my B has turned into a C, or just altered slightly. And allowing that process to happen, I think, is more natural in life than staying dogmatically to B.
Yeah.
And having that kind of left brain narrow blinking focus.
This was exactly what you were saying about people wanting it within this. Well, I can't remember what you said, the turn of phrase earlier, but essentially wanting from point A to point B and not worrying about what the experiences in between. And actually, that mentality of path of least resistance leaves you with less experiences, you know. And so what happens is if we're trying to get to a point and there is resistance, I want to bring it back to injuries in a minute. Like an injury, for example, you can't continue to go as the crow flies. You have to deviate and you have to work around it, which is what you were talking about with your knee. And by proxy, you're then experienced to this array of stimulation that you wouldn't have been before. And that gives you a greater understanding, I believe, of the whole, which also helps you find you and understand yourself.
That's a nice way of saying it, yeah. We can conceptualize this to say, if we have left and right, and we have kind of narrow versus open, we can use two words. We can use being versus doing. So we're called human beings, which means we're part of the whole, let's say. Okay, that's right brain. That's the open kind of like general idea. Left brain is more like human doings. We're so focused on this urban landscape, on doing our thing, upon making it to the end of the ladder, upon getting to the top, beating everyone else down, and we lose that, like you just said, that general awareness of the whole. And I think by taking this perspective and saying, okay, my training or my practice is part of that whole, but I have to be able to relate back to the openness and the idea of general complexity that we don't really know. I have a good idea. Me and you were sitting here right now saying we know these things. They're our best ideas based upon our own perspectives, our own experiences. They're not necessarily gospel truths. They should not be gospel truths.
Well, this is something, again, it's the importance of sharing. It's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to do this with the people that I want to speak to. Is like, you only know as much as you've been exposed to. And talking to somebody else and understanding, sharing, drawing parallels between their experiences and your own is so valuable. It's so valuable. Because again, it's this by proxy we are picking up, we are absorbing those experiences. I did this, I found this. Have you thought about it from this perspective? And that's what gives us evolution, in our thought process. I mean, we do it with lift, for example. You know, lift is I like to refer to it more as it's like a living, breathing thing. It changes. With the pandemic, for example, we've had to change our tact. We've learned new things. We've learned about digital. We're sitting here now, and this ultimately builds the whole. It might not seem it at the time, but moving laterally, as I say, doggy paddle is always better than drowning. And when you are back in the game, you can accelerate hard on that goal. And if if you get to, whether it's training, work, life, if you get hit with that thing, you have to have the ability to go, I'm cool, shake yourself off. Let's have a little jiggle to the side, and then we keep on trucking when we get back on that line. And I think exposing yourselves, putting yourself in positions, whether it's physical, and often the two obviously work together, where you're vulnerable. You put me in some places when we're doing the closed system flow, I am not comfortable at all. I couldn't know my ass from my elbow. I'm upside down, inside out. But then, you leave me without a video it, and 2 weeks later you come back, and how much I feel I've improved at that. And, if I didn't step outside that comfort zone and I went back and grumpily just did handstands, I would have never have had that growth. And I think it's really important. And perhaps movement practice, if you like, is a good lesson. Is a good teacher for that lesson.
I really think so. But I think one problem with that perspective, or one thing that we should discuss, is actually it's part of a personality trait. So we have the big 5 personality traits. We have OCEAN, openness being the O. So openness to experience and ideas. All humans aren't fully open. It's not a personality trait that all people have. Now, whether that's genetic or whether that's cultural, probably a mixture of both. What I found with my students, and you'll probably find if you tested people at Lift, is that many of those people are more likely to be open to experience. Because they're already open to taking something new, something a bit niche, something
That's
a bit
interesting. Yeah.
Left field, let's say right now. So that's also an interesting caveat, is then how do we frame, or how do we also open the eyes or open the hearts of the people that are not necessarily already open to these types of things.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because there's two questions there. Is how do you attract them? You know, I think, and I try and do that with Lift. Address, it's designed in a particular way for that reason, to appeal to a certain audience. Now that's almost like the moth to a flame. But then the thing that really impacts people is the connection. I think is actually the practice.
Right.
And that's when they're like, oh, I get it now. You know, it's not just this. I call it the Magpie Effect. So the magpie will always take what's shiny in a field, for example, but you can invert that. So if the fitness industry is happy clappy, shiny, muscles, tans, you know the story. What I did with Lift was create something which is more subtle, more refined, and that was that magpie effect. That attracts them. They're curious. But I think the thing that really changes people and makes them open their eyes is when they first get into a position and they have that eureka ding moment, and whatever connects, the shoulder suddenly sits into its socket properly, and they go, oh my god, I've never felt like that. And you literally can watch it, or even further down the line, the first muscle up, the smiles, man, like there's the smile on the people, or the pull
I would
up.
say we could even go deeper. I mean, you would say like, this is kind of buy-in and shiny fitness stuff. This is then like positive aspects of the culture. We can even go one level deeper than that, and I can say the true value to something like Lift, or a community of people that are like-minded, that are open to new things, open to being vulnerable, is that is real life. That's not some contrived or some manipulated experience. It's something that's actually, it's inherent,
it's very
in
authentic.
that practice.
It's very authentic.
And I think what the pandemic's shown is that what we're lacking right now is reality, realness, not reality TV.
No.
Realness, deeper connection with people, and a vulnerability to be with people.
Totally.
And that's what a culture in a space like that can give you. That's the potential, I think, which is priceless. That's what we came from. That's what human beings came from.
This is tribes.
Small-scale tribes, right?
Yeah.
And this is the conversation. So we've been having these great meetings. We have these physical philosophy sessions where we have a little wriggle on the floor. I'll share some floor work and a bit of softer work, and we discuss. And this is a perfect format, I think, to kind of get you vulnerable, get me vulnerable as well, open up the space, and then just discuss stuff.
Yeah.
And that's wonderful.
It works well, doesn't it? Really
That's
works well.
in some way what stems this conversation is like, okay, now we've bridged the gap between two individuals. We've opened up a vulnerable space, and now we can reap the benefits, because now it's not a conversation where we're both going, oh, maybe if I say this, he's going to think this. It's now, here's what I feel. I'm open to what you think about me, and that's cool.
And that's it.
That's a real, I think, conversation.
Well, I think again, it's attracting people as well. I think it's so interesting because it's like these conversations are so valuable to everyone. And like you said, if we asked anybody at Lift or London Movement Group, they would all be open to new experiences. A good, interesting question would be, were you at the start? And that, I mean, we can get into this all the time, but I think I see myself as a branding and an artist in many ways, is creating that moth to a flame thing where I'm actually, I'm very proud that we're in these publications. We've got GQ coming up. We've been in Men's Health recently. We're in lifestyle magazines, which are going to be touching a lot of people. And I see it as my role within Lift to try and create something which is appealing, which creates that conversation. Because the moment we have the conversation, we're cooking on gas. The moment that you're actually moving and you feel empowered, I always say physical, one thing I try and lead people to is physical empowerment. And we talked a little bit about injuries. But when it comes to like physical empowerment leads to physical freedom. It also leads to mental freedom. I've had chronic injuries, and my back pain and my hip pain, I mean, people sick of me going on about it, but I live with it, and it is completely crippling in your psyche as well. You are uncomfortable working, you are constantly there, and it goes from being maybe a 10 when you do the injury to a non-stop 2, and I don't know what's more annoying.
I would say the latter.
Yeah.
Because it's a low resolution annoyance in the background.
Yes.
And that's what pulls humanity down, I think, right now, is that we have these constant, incessant, low resolution is the wrong word, low impact kind of stresses. And these inputs that are constantly put on us, not on a major level, on a very low kind of frequency.
But also a lot of them are out of our control. And I'm just going to bring that loop back before we go into it too much, is that physical empowerment leads to physical freedom, okay? And the fact is that if we can control our bodies and we feel empowered in ourselves, we've at least removed one of those negative stimuluses. And there are so many people that are in pain. You know, we talked about lift. A lot of lift came from, and my understanding of the practice came from my own fixing of my injuries. You know, I've had an elbow reconstruction. I have a serious issue with my SI joint, which I manage all the time. That's getting a lot better through my own, you know, let's say movement practice and understanding of my body
and research
and research. But you know, that's why lift did exist, because I was thinking, if I'm doing this damage to myself, and I've done that in 10 years, what are people at a lower intensity doing at, say, a 50% intensity? What are they going to look like in 20 years? And ultimately, there's a lot more at risk in 20 years, because with the stage that I was talking at, because you've got kids, you've got a job, and your physical health becomes lower and lower on the priority list. And people slip into this negative cycle, negative feedback loop of pain, can't do this, can't do that, knee replacement, hip replacement, can't do this, can't do that. And it's this degeneration. And what I wanted to do with Lift was make sure that we could provide an education and a safe space to understand and feel and actually prevent these things happening. And that physical empowerment, empowering people through education, through movement, through new experiences, ultimately leads to physical and mental freedom. And
I would say also empowerment's a great word to use, but to drop these kind of prerequisite requirements that the fitness industry has.
Yeah.
So what people are being disempowered by, in my perspective, is that I have to do a double bodyweight back squat, otherwise my legs aren't strong enough.
Yeah.
Or even single bodyweight back squat, like my legs are strong enough. And this idea is so limiting mentally, because it's like, I'm now putting an objective number on how I feel.
Exactly.
It's so disparate. It's so like left-brained. It's funny.
Yeah, it's too
like,
far.
How can a numerical number on an external load in a sterile kind of box make you understand what you feel? This is an idea called Interreception, which is basically the connection to your internal world. How you connect to your heartbeat, your breath, your digestive system, how you're feeling certain tensions in your body. This is what I would call like general preparedness. So if we can kind of lead into maybe the philosophy type of idea. This for me is the foundation of the practice, which seems kind of funny because we're talking about movement practice. And I'm talking about how you feel about yourself. I'm talking about, so for example, this idea of valence that my friend is researching. It's this idea of the emotional expectation of a situation. So let's say you walk into a gym for the first time. What you feel internally gives you an emotion. Now, whether you notice that or not is yet to be seen. But that valence then gives you that initial emotional expectation.
It's called valence.
Valence.
VALANC.
ENC.
ENC.
Yeah. I think.
Well,
we
worked out. One thing I can do is write and spell. Don't ask me to calculate anything though.
You see my handwriting.
Yeah.
But the power of being human, so that's very much a something that's more or less subconscious. It happens on a deep gut level.
I've got some. Yeah, carry on.
But then we've got this other idea, which is reappraisal, which is a more cognitive idea, which is retrospective. It's, okay, I've had this initial experience or expecting experience.
Yeah.
And then you do a class or you do a session, you go out and you do something. Oh, it wasn't what I expected. It was positive rather than negative. Can I then reappraise that? Can I then reframe that to then be something that I want to do or enjoy to do?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's taking that positive feedback loop and then rolling with it and allowing yourself to then go again.
Well, so much that's about creating that, like we talked about empowerment, creating this environment. I think that's really interesting. When we talked about empowerment, and I can get onto a little bit more about this, about the psychological element. Is that we talked about the back squat, didn't you? And that's not empowerment. You're imprisoned by this set parameter that it's not you're not setting that. That's set externally to you. So how can that truly be aligned with what you're doing? And I think when it comes down to, you talk about these psychological experiences, if we're conditioned to be in that framework as you described it, we are really, when it comes to looking outside ourselves, people end up retracting, don't they? And is this what you're talking about, is creating an environment where they go in, it's not a scary experience, because I think if you're looking at people handstanding, you know, people go, "Oh, that's really intimidating." I mean, I think a guy who's 120 kilos on a bench press in a string vest is also pretty intimidating. So it's kind of a shift in that narrative. And do you feel that London Movement Group and a Lift is a space where we're creating space for these experiences?
Exactly.
And that's what you're getting at.
That's the first and foremost. It's not about putting prerequisites on people saying this is the standard you need to meet. It's open to any human that's open in themselves. And therefore the people are going to create that experience themselves.
So
it's not about what it looks like. It's about what the people are doing within it and how they're interacting.
But I think, I was getting onto this about the subconscious element. Can we nurture environments better for these? You know, you talked about how we're now having this conversation because this has been a process. Can we, as curators of movement, curators of humans, let's say, can we create environments and experiences which help to reduce the height of those walls to begin with? Because the amount of goodness we get out of that, the lower your barrier to entry, the greater the reward.
So, this is what I try and do a lot is because of the perspective of experience, I'm always trying to show myself in a new experience. Yeah. Because that's exactly what new people are doing. They're coming to a class and they're like, "Oh my God, this is new, there's new people, this is scary." But from our perspective as whatever you want to call it, curators, facilitators, to have a practice that also has that involved, therefore keeps us as related as possible to those new students. Because it's like, I just did something for the first time yesterday and I failed a lot. I really feel what you're going through right now. It's not like I'm some guru on a mountain that experiences bliss every day in tranquility.
Yeah, there's a lot of fitness.
I'm scared right now. There's cameras everywhere. When I'm training parkour, this is the wonderful thing about parkour.
It's so interesting, isn't it? It's all about, like, you've got to break it down. I always say to people, Lift's an ecosystem of knowledge. There's not one daddy of the knowledge or queen of knowledge in there, you know. And as soon as that starts to arise, that's not the culture that we're trying to create. It's so important. It's so important. And I think we've talked about it in the past about how everything's stolen. You know, things are just adapted. And the more humility that you can have to that, and the more going, there's no way in my 80-something years of life, if we get that far, that I can know it all. So let's just knock those walls down now, and let's just start having these conversations and experiences to allow us to actually to grow and show some. You said it a lot, actually. Vulnerability is a really key point. And do you think people can sense the vulnerability in a room?
Genuinely,
safety. Yeah.
So this is the idea of valence in itself. This is interreception. The more people trust this idea of intuition, for example, because let's say modern science has done amazing work, but one thing it's limited in some regards is putting intuition on a very low rung. It's like, no one should trust intuition. Bullshit. We have such an amazing system that's been curated via these incredibly complex ecosystems, let's say, within us, far more complex than the galaxy, to do exactly that, to be intuitive, to survive. Therefore, we can read things, not here, but here.
Yeah.
And so, for me, like, one of the biggest things that I'm trying to do with my teaching is to accept that, and to accept that all these people that are in this class are far more intelligent than they truly believe, and far more intelligent than I can cognitively understand. But if I can be open, and I can be vulnerable, and I can be real as I possibly can be, they can sense that. And if I mess up, they can forgive me for that. Rather than being the perfect teacher, which I honestly, when I first started teaching, I wouldn't teach to begin with, because I didn't think I was ready. And I was like, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And maybe there's some truth to that on small elements, but at some point,
micro level, you know.
But at some point, you have to say, well, I have to learn, and to learn, you have to fail.
Oh, mate, one of my favourite lines: if you want to learn to swim, jump in the deep end. Like, well, you work it out, or you end up at the bottom. You know, sink or swim, man. You know, I think that comes back to experience again, which is what we're talking about at the start, and it's this exposure to different experience which shapes us as men or as women or whoever you are. You know, it's these experiences, these deep end moments, these jumping in the cold water, those moments where you have a decision and you have to understand you're either going to grow from this or you're going to let it beat you. And I think there's so many lessons that can be had from life, but I mean, we'll keep on training because we could go into that for a long time. But it's, you know, let's take something as simple as a handstand. That can be, the handstand can be the single most joyous exercise on the planet, and also the most heinous, depending on your day, but not just your body, your mentality. Where's your head at today? Your load of stress. It's such what we do is such a psychosomatic relationship between our movement practice and our daily practice, being. And I think there's lessons that we can learn from our philosophies, which really do transcend far. It takes fitness away from being like this consumable thing to something that's actually an ongoing journey of internal discovery, which then leads us back to that empowerment, physical freedom. It all works in this quite nice cycle.
One of the keys
really.
you touched on there is then the idea of dosage. Like you're talking about this disparity between stress and input from training, which is kind of, you can say, intentional, and then we've already spoken about these kind of low level flux of input, and then you have obviously major inputs from relationships, from work, from kids, from finances, whatever it might be. How do you balance that up? You can't just ignore that and expect to progress in the training, which is what fitness is culture. HIIT classes, for example, are trying to push. CrossFit's trying to push.
Yeah.
That's just really high spike, really deliberate stress. It's a big input on the organism. But the organism doesn't understand what that stress is compared to what that stress is, compared to what all this stress is already going on in their life. It's like, how do we comprehend this? And so this idea of general preparedness is trying to encourage people to be like, okay, take some responsibility on, first and foremost, what are the inputs going on in your life and how do you feel? Because if you're going to a CrossFit class and you feel horrendous, you've slept for 2 hours, you can't pay your bills, whatever might be going on, then you have some maybe narcissistic mentality, which I'm speaking from experience here. You then crush yourself in the gym to punish yourself, let's say. Is this really a practice for longevity, or are we going to hit some brick walls? And I think we can both speak from that with regards to pain in our lives. How that comes out.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think having people as soundboards, as vulnerable peers around us to help us kind of see through that is super valuable.
It's a much softer approach, isn't it? It's like, be kind to yourself, not to use popularized cliches now, but be kind to yourself. And it's the same with our body. There's so much intuition that we have. We're so connected to our bodies. The one thing we can never get rid of. Yet we have to. I find, again, speaking from experience, why am I constantly asking, what do I do for this? How do I do this? That there's an element of understand what you're trying to achieve, and but I've written here, but I want to do a handstand. Understand that you want to do a handstand. But actually, there's so many roots to that handstand, and it gets back to this thing: the thing is greater than the thing. And it's that experience of getting there and those different stimuluses that you're being exposed to, which actually end up benefiting you in the long term. And I think I just wanted to bring it back, but I want to do a handstand. And we talk about general preparedness, and I'm putting myself, you're talking to me 5-10 years ago now, but I want to do this. I don't want to be generally prepared. I want to be prepared to do the handstand. What would you say to that? And I think when it comes to that goal setting, is it important to have a vision, a long term? Yes, I want to do the handstand, but is it also equally important to have that element of internal acceptance that today I'm going to roll around on the floor and work on my hips, in the knowledge that in 2 days' time, when I've let my shoulders rest for 2 days, that freedom in my hips and connection to my trunk, my pelvic floor is going to benefit me in handstand. So how would you approach that? I'm going to bring it back to, say if someone's watching this, for example, and they go, I don't want to be generally prepared. I want to learn handstand. How do we encourage them? And how do we approach that in order that they do the wrist prep, they do the general mobility, and they are not just fixated with these fitness blinkers?
This is the golden question. If I knew the perfect answer, I'd be a millionaire right now.
Well, you have. This is how we're going.
This is why I present my perspective, because we're both talking about from experience right now.
Yeah.
It's like we've been both there. That we don't want to do the preparedness work. We don't want to do the basics. We want to go straight to the thing. And here's why I'm trying to preach this idea of the thing is bigger than the thing. It's not about that thing. If that's your thing, you reach it, and all of a sudden you're on the top of the mountain. You're like, well, what's next? Do I go back down or do I look for another mountain? And so the day you achieve the thing you're looking to achieve is kind of shit.
Yeah, I remember that.
You've lost
vividly.
that process.
Man, that's so true. Yeah, no, that was like me in the powerlifting. I remember one of the goals when you're, a red-blooded kid full of body dysmorphia and protein shakes. I want to be the biggest. I want to be the strongest in the gym. I literally remember one day I was pulling 270 kilos or something on a deadlift. It was in a Fitness First in Kirkstall. It's had a lifting stuff, but you can. This was before gyms really upped it to look anything like an athletic training centre. This was still in those times. And I remember I walked in and I tipped the scale. I was 109.5 kilos or something, and I felt so solid. I couldn't move. I literally just felt like I'm weary. I'm weary. I'm only 5'10". You know what I mean? Like, this is a lot of weight. And I pulled this weight, and I remember looking around, and I was like, everyone was just staring at this lift, all of the blokes in the set, and I was like, this is it? You did it. And,
made it.
And now I feel, what's that? And literally with empty, mate, I literally was like, I had this epiphany. And then it was almost like serendipitously in the 2 weeks that followed, my back went out, blew out my back so bad. Like, I couldn't walk. I dropped myself to the floor. And then the elbows happened in 2014. I had my elbow redone, and it was almost like we focused so hard on getting to the top, and this is it, nothing, And this is all I have. This is what I have to show for it.
The beauty of a bigger, more open perspective is that is no longer the top.
No,
and that's not to say that pulling a big weight in a deadlift is bad. It's just to say that if it doesn't serve something bigger than that, it may be limiting to you. And if that's your summit, maybe you're limiting your experience. Maybe not, because there's also people that are having a wonderful life being a powerlifter.
Of course.
That's just from my perspective.
Of course, yeah. Maybe if I didn't get injured, that wouldn't have happened. But I certainly was so uncomfortable in my body, psychologically and physically. Major joints giving up. My brain, I couldn't see how big I was. My mum was in tears. I was like, I can't. I look like a skinny guy. I wasn't it wasn't serving me at all. And as I say, serendipitously, I think these injuries and things happen in order to show me a different path. And I think it's been some of the single greatest lessons. But has that served me? In all honesty, for the last 5 or 6 years of setting up lift, as well as everyone else, I'm still struggling with those injuries. So I'm unpicking this damage that I've already done, and I did it to myself. So did it serve me? It served ego. I don't think it served me long term physically.
A good friend of mine recently told me regret is kind of useful in the now.
Yeah.
I think going back to your original question, the key detail there is rate of expected progress.
Okay.
It's like the question was something like, what detail a beginner
wants to do the thing right this now. Mentality of
and it's basically a beginner wants to go exponential. They want to go from 0 to U-curve. Boom. Sometimes it works like that. You can unlock. I've had some wonderful online students.
And this
that
is
come
dosage
to me.
we're going to be talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, cool.
This is the dosage of what's going to happen. And for me, and what I found is that dosage is related so much to resources. If you've got all of these other external stresses away from your training in your life, how do you expect your organism to deal with that? Because all the organism is doing is, what's the input, what's the stimulus, and what's the best adaptation for me to remain at equilibrium? Point blank. Right?
Yeah.
So if I've got all these crazy stimuli, and the body has to choose, or the organism has to go, okay, which one is the most important? What's the best adaptation? And then I go from there. And if you've got, here's a crazy stressor, here's a crazy stressor, here's a crazy stressor, overwhelming. And so I think allowing that more of an open perspective and saying, okay, here's my orientation, that gives me a lot of purpose already. I can amble my way through here, and I can meander if I want. I want to maybe cut off the chaff from the top and the bottom. I don't want to go crazy into obsessive or nothing. I want to be about this kind of like 70% in the middle kind of area. And some days I can push more. Great. Don't push because we're saying take it a bit easy. Don't not push, sorry. But also don't just take it too easy and coast if you're going slow. There has to be an intention to do your best. But I really love the work of Jordan Peterson. He says, it's not about being the best. It's about being better than who you were yesterday.
Yeah.
Which is a tiny incremental improvement.
I think
and that's the practice.
It's so valuable, isn't
right?
it? It's so valuable.
And that leaves space. And the key word for me is space, like space mentally, space physically, because then I'm able to be creative. I'm able to be playful.
Exactly.
I'm able to laugh at myself.
Who was it? I can't remember who it was now, and I'm not going to get his name wrong, but he was on Joe Rogan and talked about training efficiency. And it was like, well, I train 100% on Monday and you need to wait another 7 days before you can train 100% again. Far better to train 20% over 5 days and then have an extra 2 days at 20%. You've made extra. You've done more volume, but you've done it in a way that the dosage is applied in these micro doses rather than a full whack.
For skill work, for sure.
Yeah, but this is what I was going to say here, is that if I'm me, I'm trying to bring it back to my own experience. So I'm running to the top of the mountain. I've hurt myself. I want to get into movement practice because I know deep down, I know this is what I need to do, but I'm still holding on to that ego. So when it comes to explaining that, we can still do the handstand, can't we? And then build in, and I was going to say, the thing that really's been useful for me on these down deregulating days where we breathe, we have these moving philosophies, is actually we're just doing this closed system flow on the floor. It's all tying in and it benefits the end goal.
Yeah.
But I'm still getting my 2 or 3 days a week fix on hardcore handstand training. But I now have an understanding that what I'm doing in between is actually still benefiting the thing, if you like. And is that kind of how you would structure it with people?
That's
Would you
definitely
base it
one
on their
perspective? Yeah, it's definitely one perspective. That's not a bad perspective. I'm not going to say that my perspective is the ultimate one.
But no, I'm saying I'm thinking in real terms here. So like just to bring it back to the training side of things, because ultimately I want to break down these barriers for people to understand how they might get into it. With your programming, for example, is if I come to you and want to do the handstand, do you mix that up? Do you do like, right, you're going to do handstand, hate to put so much structure to it, but like Monday, Thursday, and then a deloaded day on a Saturday, and then in between we're going to do various things, or how do you shape it?
How I work with people is I don't work with many people. I work with 12 people maximum at a time, and a few others here and there. The reason why is because I'm not saying you should do this, this, and this. What I'm saying is, where the fuck are you right now? Sorry if I did.
No, that's all right. Yes.
Where are you right now?
Yeah.
Where are you at in your life?
Yeah.
With all these things going on a GP level.
Yeah.
If you're having crazy stress right now, I'm not going to give you 6 days a week training because you cannot deal with it. It's going to make you miserable. You're going to lose gains. You're going to lose interest in a practice. My biggest thing with students is I want you to be a tractor, not a Ferrari, because a tractor is going to go slow, but it's going to continue for a long time.
Training efficiency is what we're talking about. Dose,
dosage. Dosage on a open, general perspective, like thinking more right brain than left brain. Okay. I want this individual to want to practice, to have space to be like, yes, that's what I want to do. If it's like, oh my god, I've had like 6 hours sleep, I've got a 12-hour day, and now I've got to do 3 hours of strength training, that's the last thing I want to do right now. Do you think that person's going to last very long? No.
And I see that's such an interesting one, because that process really does involve you and your experience to actually to impart that on. I guess that comes back to London Movement Group being a safe environment, Lift being a safe space. It's funny because I think that's the biggest problem. I think when everyone gets into it and understands what it actually is, the fact that this niche form of training isn't niche, and it shouldn't be niche. It's paradoxically so. This type of training is perceived to be very niche, very for the Edos, for the Wil Browns, but actually it's got the least barriers to entry in moving, you know? And I think that our goal, really, and like I say, if you find the secret, let me know. Our goal is to, how do we dangle that carrot in this very focused, very fast A to B world that we find ourselves in. And I actually think the upset of the pandemic is a great opportunity for this kind of conversation and this kind of environment to flourish. Is like, how do we now get these people and go, it's okay, let's have these conversations. How much stress have you got on? Is that best for your body?
Right. I think it's less about maybe us dangling a carrot to someone else, but it's more like, can I take responsibility to dangle that carrot for myself? Yeah. Because when it's a self-generated carrot, that's where the gold is, I think. Because when people are struggling with like meaninglessness and these types of like, I don't know what to do with my life, and I'm doing a job that I don't like, and but then they cast that carrot in front of themselves, and they're like, you know what? I'm at A, And the B is where I want to be right now. And I've dictated that for myself. I'm not a passive agent in my life. I am the agent, and I can go to that direction. Cool. Okay. I'm at least setting sail in that direction. That's something. And I think that's the key part for me, is then I go through this reflection process with my students and I say, okay, well, what really inspires you? I'm not going to tell you have to do floor work. I'm not going to tell you have to do parkour. I'm sharing my open, genuine experiences. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm drawn towards. If that resonates, if that inspires you, awesome. What parts of that can you do? What are accessible right now? So I have some students saying, I want to do everything. I'm like, okay, cool. What do you do for a living? Oh, well, I work like 40, 50 hours a week, and I've got a girlfriend and a few mates, and we hang out, and I have probably like 3 or 4 sessions a week. I'm like, so you've got 15 goals and you have 3 or 4 sessions a week.
It's not going to happen. Yeah.
And then there's the key part, I think, in the creative process of a coach, is like, how do you then curate a practice for someone that resonates with their genuine inspiration or goals, that's still of the perspective of general, you know? And this is why I kind of made some kind of like layered structure of, okay, if you need to be generally prepared first and foremost, then we can start to work on general capacity. On a general level, do you have capacity, range of motion, force production throughout the range of motion, your strength work? Then we have this kind of skill acquisition level of subjective. Can I learn? Am I able to learn how to learn? Can I deal with frustration? Can I go slow if I need to? Can I push myself if I can? Am I able to manage myself throughout those situations? Because I am the person. I'm not passive. It's not a practice that I just say, do something for me.
Yeah.
You know? It's like, well, okay, I've got this thing. No, I'm in control. I can manage this. I have responsibility over myself. And that, I think, is a huge problem in modern life, is to say, oh man, I don't have responsibility for myself. I'm going to just say, oh, I'm sick. Doctor, what do I need to do? What's the quickest fix I need? And then what happens from that? It's like left brain focus. Okay, that specific thing is going to get me that specific thing. The stuff that comes around it doesn't matter. I'll deal with that when I'm old.
Yeah.
And look what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, it's too much.
Massively off topic.
No, it's interesting because it kind of brings us back to this root philosophy. You know, I'm very much in this conversation, really I was trying to bring it back, because we can go off on one for a long time, as we always do. We'll save that for private. But I think the thing for me there was, I think we covered it really well, was this barrier to entry, perceived barrier to entry, almost this snobbishness of movement, which shouldn't exist. That exists as a product of fitness, applying what the philosophy of movement incorrectly, I believe. And I think that obviously the more people that we can get moving, the better. I think the more people we can get moving with intent, and actually moving to the point where I'm moving outside of just this practice for this hour. How does it transcend, as we spoke about, into the rest of people's lives? I think they're really, really key issues, particularly
I agree.
The fitness industry. I think, I don't want to fire any shots in these conversations at all, but it's something that we do need to work at, and hopefully things like London Movement Group and Lift can facilitate that.
I think one thing we have to accept, and I agree, I don't want to be too controversial here or fire shots, because I think everyone's, from what I can see, being genuine, trying to be genuine, and it's just difference of opinion, difference of idea, difference of experience.
Yeah.
Of course, because the culture is 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah.
Maximum.
Yeah.
Obviously, we can name drop Ido as someone that coined and tried to be very much the coiner of the term movement culture and push his ideas forward. For me, he's incredibly inspiring to most people, I would say, whether they like to admit it or not. The reason why is, I think his biggest strength from my experience is that he creates belief systems in people that are around him. He makes them believe in things. And now, whether that's truly what they believe or it's something that they've been inspired by through his words, who knows whether that's good, bad, kind of relevant. I don't want to be too controversial there, but I think that's a great power. That's a great trump card in his hand. He can be like, you see this toilet roll? It's the most amazing toilet roll ever, and now the people are going to buy the toilet roll. So that's what really kickstarted this revolution of culture of movement. People moving generally, not to compete in a specific sport, but to actually fuel a life experience, which is awesome. And then from there, because Ido, I think, is quite abrupt, he's quite clear, he's quite brutal at times, he's very well spoken, he's very intelligent, he has these clickbait ideas that sell. And then people try and take them, manipulate them, and without his perspective, because we forget he's 40-something and has had a lot of years going through this stuff,
He's had
like
loads
20
of different
years.
experiences as
Huge
well.
amount of experience.
All sorts of different modalities of training.
And then most people that then repackage those similar ideas haven't had that experience.
Yeah, of course.
Which of course, they're looking at the elephant from the different perspective, which is my favorite analogy for life. It's like 5 blind men meet an elephant. One holds the trunk and thinks it's a snake. One holds the leg and thinks it's a tree. The other one goes to the back and thinks it's a horse. It's like, until you see all these perspectives, you miss the bigger picture.
Yeah, sure.
Again, think right brain being. So then what I think happens is then you misconstrue certain ideas, and there's certain popular ones, and then people like to use them because business, people want to get business.
Well,
I think for me, like, I was in a very fortunate position of growing up as a 19, 20-year-old. I didn't have any people relying on me. I didn't have a job. I was at university. I got inspired to then travel and learn all this stuff. I could then take on these first-hand perspectives and then like generate my own
it's
ideas.
Interesting. I think, again, we could go on about this all day, but I've just written there, business versus experience. I think while reading, I spoke earlier about Lyft morphing, and it's like, and it came from an experience. And I think that's the thing, is like with Lyft, and I'm sure it's the same with London Movement Group, and that's what, I'm sure you're about to say, with your experiences shaping the outcome of which is LMG. And likewise, my experiences within injuries and so on shaping Lyft. And we're not trying to repackage anything. We're not trying to claim that we've created anything different, but rather the entities that we have created are the product of all of these different experiences. And because they are, we become the authority within that space, and it's organically grown off of the work that Ido did with movement culture.
For one example.
For one example, he set the precedent for movement culture, didn't he? And I think some of what's going on at the minute with the adoption of the term movement by the industry is there's very much a top-down approach coming towards getting involved. They're using it as a business, as the flavor of the week, if you like, using that as a catch point, and kind of that defeats the point, I think. And I think what's very interesting, and some of the parallels that I've drawn from this conversation today, is that LMG is a product of your experience. It's very grassroots, grass up, as is Lyft for us. It's a product of our experiences, my experience, being packaged into this new beast, if you like, which only serves to benefit everybody else. So I think, you said standing on the shoulders of giants when you're talking about Ido.
Yeah. It's like, you don't want to necessarily push people down. It's like when something new grows in the soil, it doesn't just push everything else away necessarily. It has to somewhat interlink into the local ecosystem, which you'll know more than me, being the grower of wonderful plants.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is then, if that's able to happen, the local ecosystem can then be a reward, or be rewarded by that growth. Because, for example, that thing grows and the ripe fruits come off, and then generate more, let's say, growth potential for the ecosystem.
Nutrients for the nutrients system.
Exactly.
There you go, yeah.
And those wonderful fruits can be, for example, wonderful experience from the students, or, for example, newer ideas.
Yeah, but they can pick that fruit, they can digest it, and then they can grow their own tree. And I think that's really interesting, mate. And I think this ecosystem knowledge, Ido, huge inspiration to us all to shout out. In terms of it's putting movement culture on the map. I think it's gone in many different tangents now. I think it's safe to say. I think it's such a free practice. And sorry, Karen.
Go on. Just to quickly put on Ido, it's like, I think the biggest problem for him is that he wanted to be the authority. It was his genuine passion, his genuine idea, but he then opened himself up for shots to be fired because he wanted to be the giver of truth, let's say. And now what we've just spoken about, we've kind of painted this picture of one big tree, fruits fall down, somewhat that's ideas, but then those ideas have to be moved forward.
Yeah.
And therefore that tree can't then own those ideas. it then needs to say, you know what, they're now free in the world. And now these newer teachers are coming along and pushing their genuine experience onto these ideas and then sharing them.
It's not taking the limelight away, it's an evolution of the whole. And I think that's really important. So I think it'd be really nice, man. We've talked a lot about, you know, our philosophies and things. We just mentioned Ido there. Like, what other coaches to finish this off? What other coaches, you know, for the guys who are watching, you know, what are good starting points if they wanted to learn about movement culture, or even any books you've read, you know, anything like that? What do you think? What do you think you can point the guys? What direction?
My most recent teacher has been Tom Wexler, who's wonderful. He's also from Israel. He's an amazing thinker. Spent a lot of time in Japan. He's definitely inspired my thinking to be less rigid and far more open, kind of Zen style, which is very wonderful. So he's been a big impact over the last couple of years. Before that, I was being taught by Marcello Palazzo. Again, wonderful thinker. He's actually joined forces with Ido now, so he's actually somewhat of his right-hand man as far as I'm concerned. Books. Wow, there's so many books. One of my favorite
like a library.
One of my favorite books for learning is called The Art of Learning. And it's by Josh Waitzkin. It's just a beautiful artistic book about learning and his genuine experiences. He's Bobby Fischer. They made a movie about him. He's genuinely the real deal. He went from child prodigy in chess to then world champion in a certain martial art. Oh, I forget the name. That's a must read. I think it's wonderful. The Peaceful Warrior, again, super beautiful story about how a young man's kind of on this journey towards this one specific ideal, and then through injury realizes there's much more to that. And again, a beautiful story. And it's more of an archetypal story of like, what does it really mean to grow, to be vulnerable, to fail.
Sounds interesting about what we're talking about today. It'd be a great book.
That's why I was
book
there.
For today.
I love the work of Jordan Peterson. It pulled me out of a couple of holes in my past life, and I think you can't quite deny the power of his perspective. And again,
I think his
human perspective. Human perspective is limited. No matter how intelligent someone is, they're all limited because it's an idea, but it still has huge value. So I think for me, they're probably the 3 books that I would recommend.
Yeah, nice, man. Well, listen, thanks for coming down. We'll call it there, and then I'll see you on the mat sometime. See you later, man.